The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council building shimmered with emergency lighting as dozens of alien species gathered for what might be their most desperate meeting ever. In the center of the circular chamber, a holographic image flickered to life, showing Ambassador Vellani, her blue-scaled face streaked with what looked like tears. Honored council members, Vellani's voice trembled through the universal translator. I speak to you from the ruins of New Harmony, our third largest colony world. The Korthak Empire has broken through our final defensive line. Our beautiful garden worlds are burning. The assembled aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some had tentacles that coiled nervously, others had feathers that ruffled with anxiety. They had all heard stories about the Korthak, but seeing the destruction firsthand was different. The hologram showed cities that once housed millions now reduced to smoking craters. Orbital stations that had taken decades to build were nothing but twisted metal floating in space. Council Director Morgeth, a large creature with purple skin and multiple arms, leaned forward in his chair. His species had been part of the council for over 1,000 years, and he had never seen anything quite this bad. Ambassador Vellani, what is your current military status? Gone, Vellani replied simply. Our entire defense fleet consisted of 47 ships. The Korthak destroyed them in the first hour of their attack. We had hoped our peaceful reputation would protect us, but they seem to enjoy destroying beautiful things just because they can. The chamber fell silent, except for the quiet humming of the life support systems. Everyone knew the Korthak reputation. They were not conquerors who wanted to rule. They were destroyers who found joy in wiping out entire civilizations. They would take the Zalari worlds, strip them of resources, and then move on to find new victims. Counselor Yethan, a tall, thin being with silver skin, checked his datapad nervously. Our peacekeeping forces are spread across 17 different sectors right now. We have 3 other major conflicts requiring immediate attention. The Sector 7 rebellion, the mining disputes in the Outer Rim, and those pirate attacks near the trade routes. Morgeth's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought among his people. How long do we have before the Korthak reach your core worlds, Ambassador? 3 rotations, maybe less, Vellani responded, her image flickering as explosions rocked her location. Our homeworld of Zalaria has 8 billion civilians. We have no way to evacuate them all. The council chamber erupted in worried chatter. Various aliens spoke in their native languages, creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and growls. Some species offered what little they could spare, a few outdated patrol ships here, some medical supplies there, but everyone knew it would not be nearly enough. Counselor, Yethan suddenly pointed to a small section of the galactic map displayed on the main screen. Wait, what about the new species? The ones from that blue planet in Sector 12. Morgeth followed his gaze to a tiny blue dot that had only recently been added to their charts. You mean the humans? They only achieved faster-than-light travel about 6 months ago. Their technology is extremely primitive by our standards. But they did manage to build working hyperspace engines, Yethan pointed out. That suggests they might have some industrial capacity. Morgeth made a dismissive gesture with 2 of his arms. They are barely past burning fossil fuels for energy. Their largest ships are probably cargo vessels. What could they possibly contribute to a military crisis of this magnitude? Maybe some basic medical supplies or raw materials if we are lucky. Other council members nodded in agreement. The humans were curiosities at best, a young species that had somehow stumbled into space travel, but were clearly decades behind even the most basic galactic civilizations. Their planet was listed in the databases as a moderate environment world, with standard gravitational parameters and typical atmospheric composition. Very well, Morgeth decided. Send them a standard humanitarian aid request. Every little bit helps, I suppose. The message was composed quickly and transmitted across the galaxy using the Council's fastest communication relays. It was polite, formal, and completely routine. The Galactic Council respectfully requests humanitarian aid for the Zalari crisis. Any assistance would be greatly appreciated. On Earth, in the Oval Office of the White House, President Tyler Jackson received the decoded message at 3 in the morning. He read it once, then again, then called his Secretary of Defense immediately. "Get me the Joint Chiefs," he said quietly into the phone. All of them, now. None of the Council members could have imagined that their simple request for medical supplies was about to unleash something the galaxy had never seen before. The Pentagon's underground war room buzzed with activity as military officers from every branch of service filed in through reinforced steel doors. The room itself looked like something from a science fiction movie, with massive screens covering every wall and holographic projectors, casting three-dimensional images of distant star systems into the air above a circular table. Admiral Blake had been awake for 36 hours straight, surviving on nothing but black coffee and determination. His gray hair was slightly messy, and his uniform showed the wrinkles of a man who had been living in his office. But his eyes were sharp and focused as he watched the final group of commanders take their seats. "Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral," Blake began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded ships through storms that would terrify most people. 6 hours ago, we received a request for humanitarian aid from something called the Galactic Council. They asked for medical supplies and maybe some raw materials to help a species called the Zal. He paused and gestured to the holographic display behind him, which showed 12 planets orbiting a distant star. 6 of the planets were highlighted in red, indicating they were already under enemy control. "Here's what we're actually sending them," Blake continued, his voice getting harder. "The entire Pacific Fleet, the entire Atlantic Fleet, and half the reserves. 200 of our best warships, from destroyers to heavy battlecruisers. 50,000 of our finest Marines, sailors, and support personnel." Captain Williams, a young officer who commanded one of the newer destroyer classes, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had read the intelligence reports during the flight to Washington, and the numbers were not encouraging. "Admiral, sir," Williams said, raising his hand slightly, "the intelligence we've gathered suggests the Korthok Empire has over 2,000 combat vessels. Their technology appears to be significantly more advanced than ours. Are we really expected to engage a force 10 times our size and somehow win?" Admiral Blake interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Captain Williams, we are not expected to engage them. We are not expected to fight them. We are expected to completely and utterly destroy them so they never threaten anyone ever again." The room fell silent, except for the quiet humming of the air conditioning system. Several officers exchanged glances, but no one questioned the Admiral's statement. They had all seen what happened when America decided something needed to be done. Blake turned to a stocky man in army fatigues, sitting near the front of the room. "Colonel Martinez, give me a status report on our ground forces." Colonel Martinez stood up with the easy confidence of someone who had spent the last 20 years fighting in every difficult environment Earth had to offer. His face was tanned and weathered, with scars that told stories of battles in deserts, jungles, and frozen wastelands. "Sir, the expeditionary force is locked and loaded," Martinez said with a slight grin. "We've got the 10th Mountain Division, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, 3 Ranger Battalions, and 2 Special Forces groups. These boys and girls have been training in the Nevada nuclear test sites for radiation exposure, the Antarctic research stations for extreme cold operations, and the Sahara Desert for high-temperature combat." Martinez pulled up a datapad and glanced at it briefly. "Honestly, sir, they're getting bored with Earth-based training. Last week, Private Johnson from the Mountain Division asked me if the alien planets would be more challenging than the Colorado Rockies in winter. Private Davis from the Marines wanted to know if alien gravity would be heavier than what she experienced during underwater demolition training. Some of the officers in the room chuckled quietly, but there was no humor in their eyes. They knew these soldiers were not joking around. Meanwhile, thousands of light-years away in the command center of a massive Korthok warship, Intelligence Officer Vrex was having a very different conversation. His species looked somewhat like giant insects, with 4 arms and compound eyes that could process multiple data streams simultaneously. War Leader Krenth Vrex said, his voice making clicking sounds that the ship's translator converted into Galactic Standard Language. We have intercepted communications from the primitive species that the Council contacted. They appear to be mobilizing some kind of military response. War Leader Krenth, an even larger member of the same species, examined the data with the predatory satisfaction of someone who had conquered 47 different worlds. His mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his people. 200 ships, Krenth said, his voice dripping with amusement, against our armada of over 2,000 vessels. These mammals must have completely lost their minds. Vrex brought up detailed scans of the human ships on the main display. The vessels looked bulky and primitive compared to the sleek, elegant designs preferred by most galactic civilizations. They were covered in thick armor plating and bristled with what appeared to be crude projectile weapons instead of sophisticated energy beams. Look at their construction, Krenth continued, gesturing with one of his 4 arms. Heavy armor, redundant systems, weapons that fire solid projectiles. They build like prey species, everything designed for defense and survival, rather than efficient conquest. What neither Korthok officer understood was that humans built their ships the same way they built everything else. To keep working when everything went wrong. To survive in conditions that would destroy other equipment. And to keep fighting long, after any reasonable species would have given up. The war was about to begin, and neither side truly understood what they were facing. The silence of deep space was broken by the sudden appearance of 200 human warships as they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zelari system. The massive vessels materialized in perfect formation, their gray hulls reflecting the light of the distant star. But what greeted them was a scene of horror that made even the most experienced officers clench their fists in anger. The third planet in the system, once a beautiful garden world with blue oceans and green continents, was now a burning wasteland. Massive Korthok bombardment platforms hung in orbit like vultures, their plasma cannons systematically turning cities into pools of molten glass. From space, the humans could see the glowing craters, where millions of innocent civilians had lived just days before. On the bridge of the flagship Constitution, Admiral Blake stared at the tactical display with cold fury. His weathered hands gripped the railing as he watched the enemy ships continue their methodical destruction of the planet below. Around him, his bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, but he could see the anger in their eyes too. Communications open a channel to all ships, Blake ordered, his voice steady, despite the rage building inside him. Channel open, sir, replied Lieutenant Peterson, the young communications officer, whose hands trembled slightly as she worked her console. All ships. This is Admiral Blake aboard the Constitution. His voice echoed through the fleet. You are now looking at what happens when evil goes unchecked. Those bombardment platforms are committing genocide while we watch. We did not travel 20,000 light-years to negotiate or issue warnings. We are weapons-free. I repeat, we are weapons-free. Across the system, the Korthok fleet began moving to intercept the human vessels. War Leader Krenth sat in his command chair aboard the massive dreadnought Bone Crusher, watching the tactical display with the confidence of someone who had never lost a space battle. His compound eyes tracked the approaching human ships, analyzing their formations and weapon signatures. Their vessels are smaller than expected, Krenth noted to his tactical officer. My dreadnoughts outgunned their largest ships 3-1. This will be over quickly. The Korthok had spent centuries perfecting space combat, according to established galactic conventions. Ships would line up in organized formations, exchange long-range energy weapon fire, and the side with superior technology and numbers would eventually force the other to retreat. It was civilized, predictable, and efficient. What happened next shattered every assumption about how space battles were supposed to work. Captain Johnson of the heavy cruiser Montana had been studying the system's asteroid belt during the approach, while other officers focused on enemy ship positions. He noticed something the Korthok had overlooked. The belt contained several asteroids larger than city blocks, just drifting in predictable orbits. "Helm, take us into the asteroid field," Johnson ordered. "Gunnery, I want you to select the 3 largest rocks you can find. We're going to accelerate them to 0.9 light speed and send them as gifts to those bombardment platforms." His weapons officer, Commander Peterson, grinned as she targeted the massive space rocks. "Sir, at that velocity, each asteroid will hit with the force of a nuclear weapon." "That's the idea," Johnson replied coldly. Meanwhile, Commander Davis, aboard the destroyer Texas, was demonstrating a different approach to unconventional warfare. Instead of the standard torpedo spreads that most galactic navies used, she launched something the Korthok had never encountered: swarms of artificial intelligence-guided missiles that could think for themselves. "Release the wolves," Davis ordered, and 300 small missiles shot out from her ship's launch tubes. But these weren't ordinary weapons. Each missile had a computer brain that could adapt to enemy countermeasures in real time, communicate with the other missiles, and make tactical decisions independently. The Korthok point defense systems, designed to stop predictable torpedo attacks, were completely overwhelmed as the missile swarm split up, regrouped, and attacked from multiple angles simultaneously. But perhaps the most shocking moment came when Captain Rodriguez of the destroyer Wyoming did something that violated every rule of civilized space combat. Instead of maintaining a safe distance and exchanging fire, he aimed his ship directly at a Korthok battlecruiser and activated his engines at maximum power. "All hands, brace for impact," Rodriguez announced calmly over the ship's intercom. "We're going in hard." The Wyoming had been built like everything else humans constructed, to survive the impossible. Its prow was reinforced with layers of armor and shock-absorbing materials, designed specifically for ramming attacks that other species considered suicidal. The impact was devastating. The Wyoming's armored nose punched straight through the Korthok ship's hull, and the destroyer's momentum carried it completely through the enemy vessel, tearing it in half. On the bridge of the Bone Crusher, War Leader Krenth watched his carefully organized fleet dissolve into chaos as human ships did things that shouldn't be possible. His formations scattered as captains tried to avoid the incoming asteroid bombardment. His point defense systems failed against the thinking missile swarms, and his heavy cruisers were being rammed by ships that should have been destroyed in the collision. "What are they doing?" Krenth roared, his mandibles clicking in distress. "This isn't how space combat works. There are rules, there are conventions." Back on the Constitution, Admiral Blake watched the enemy fleet fragment with grim satisfaction. The Korthok ships were more advanced individually, but they had been built for the kind of organized, predictable warfare that dominated galactic military thinking. "Helm, take us straight through their center line," Blake ordered. "Gunnery, target their command vessels. I want their leadership eliminated first. Marines, prepare for boarding operations." His tactical officer, Commander Brooks, looked up from his console with surprise. "Sir, boarding operations? In the middle of a fleet engagement?" Blake's expression didn't change. "The Korthok are about to learn something important about humans, Commander. We don't fight space battles, we fight wars. And wars aren't won by following rules, they're won by doing whatever it takes to protect innocent people." The battle was just beginning, but already the Korthok were learning that they had made a terrible mistake in underestimating the species from the small blue planet. The drop pods screamed through the poisonous atmosphere of Zellery Prime like meteors, their heat shields glowing red-hot as they plunged toward the war-torn surface below. Inside one of the lead pods, Sergeant Major Thompson checked his equipment one final time while his stomach lurched from the violent descent. Around him, 12 Marines sat strapped into their seats, their faces calm despite the fact they were about to land in the middle of an active war zone. The Korthok had been fighting on this planet for 6 months, slowly grinding down the last pockets of Zellery resistance with overwhelming firepower and numbers. They had conquered 47 worlds using the exact same strategy: establish orbital superiority, land massive armies, and crush any opposition through sheer weight of numbers and advanced plasma weapons. What they didn't expect was for the humans to drop their troops directly into the most dangerous combat zones on the planet. Thompson's pod slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force, the impact cushions barely keeping his squad from being knocked unconscious. As the pod doors blew open with explosive charges, he was immediately hit by a wave of toxic air that would have killed most galactic species within minutes. "Gas masks on, boys," Thompson called out, though half his squad was already breathing the poisonous atmosphere without protection. "Remember, this stuff is supposed to be deadly to us." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The Korthok had spent weeks saturating this battlefield with chemical weapons designed to make the area uninhabitable. But these Marines had trained in the Nevada nuclear test sites, where radiation levels would cook most aliens alive. They had practiced combat operations in the frozen wastelands of Antarctica, where the cold would freeze alien blood in their veins. The little poison gas was just another Tuesday for them. Private Anderson, a quiet farm kid from Iowa who had spent his childhood working 16-hour days in all kinds of weather, shouldered his rifle and looked around at the devastated landscape. "Sarge, this place looks worse than our back 40 after that tornado hit." The battlefield was a nightmare of twisted metal, burning vehicles, and crater-filled ground. The gravity was 30% heavier than Earth normal, which should have slowed down human troops significantly. Instead, it just reminded them of the weighted training exercises they did back home. 20-4 hours later, Thompson was still leading his squad through continuous combat operations while checking his Marines' vital signs on his heads-up display. Most galactic species would have collapsed from exhaustion after 6 hours of fighting in these conditions. His people were just getting warmed up. "Rodriguez, how are your ammo levels?" Thompson called out to his heavy weapons specialist, who was currently using a captured Korthak plasma cannon to reduce an enemy bunker to slag. "Running low on the good stuff, Sarge," Rodriguez replied cheerfully, "but I've got plenty of their gear to work with. These alien weapons aren't bad once you figure out how to keep them from overheating." Around them, Korthok defensive positions that had held against Solari attacks for months were crumbling under human assault tactics that seemed to ignore basic military logic, where other species would establish supply lines and fight methodically. Humans simply lived off whatever they could scavenge and kept pushing forward. Private Anderson had become something of a legend among the Marines when his squad was forced to evacuate their wounded from a strategic mountain pass. Instead of retreating with them, he stayed behind to hold the position alone. For 18 straight hours, he fought off wave after wave of Korthok reinforcements, using everything from his rifle to rocks when his ammunition ran low. When the enemy finally overran his position, they found him unconscious but still breathing, slumped over his empty rifle with 17 dead Korthok soldiers scattered around his foxhole. His last radio transmission had been, "Tell my mom I used everything. She taught me about hunting." Meanwhile, Colonel Martinez was coordinating the entire planetary assault from a forward command post that any sane military officer would have considered a death trap. The position was taking direct artillery fire from Korthok heavy weapons, with plasma bolts exploding all around the reinforced bunker. "Sir, His communications officer called out over the sound of incoming shells. Intelligence reports that enemy forces are massing for a major assault on our position. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Martinez looked up from his tactical displays, with the kind of calm that only came from years of fighting in impossible situations. Negative. We hold this position until the job is done. 6 hours later, when the massive Korthok assault finally broke through the human defensive perimeter, the enemy troops found nothing but empty bunkers and abandoned equipment. The humans had tunneled out through the underground cave system and were already attacking Korthok positions from behind. On the other side of the planet, Korthok war leader Vrex was having the worst day of his military career. His troops, who had been trained to fight other galactic species, were completely unprepared for enemies who seemed to thrive in conditions that would kill his own warriors through simple exposure. High Command, Vrex transmitted desperately. The humans are not behaving according to any known military doctrine. They do not retreat when outnumbered. They do not seek shelter when under heavy fire. They fight continuously in radiation levels that should be lethal, and they appear to get stronger the longer the battle continues. He paused, watching his tactical display as another Korthok stronghold fell to human assault troops. Request immediate reinforcements or authorization for full withdrawal. Our current forces are insufficient to contain them. The response from High Command was silence. Not because they were ignoring Vrex's request, but because they were receiving identical reports from 12 other planetary commanders across the Korthak Empire. Everywhere humans had landed, the same impossible story was repeating itself. The humans weren't just winning battles, they were rewriting the rules of warfare itself. And the Korthok were learning too late that they had picked a fight with a species that had evolved to survive anything the universe could throw at them. The bridge of the Korthok flagship Bone Crusher looked like a tornado had hit it. Sparking control panels cast eerie shadows across twisted metal, and the acrid smell of burned electronics filled the air. Through the shattered viewport, the wreckage of what had once been the most powerful fleet in the galaxy drifted silently through space. War Leader Krenth sat slumped in his command chair, his forearms hanging limply at his sides. His compound eyes, which had once gleamed with predatory confidence, now stared dully at the human admiral who stood across from him. Between them, on a makeshift table constructed from salvaged metal, lay a simple document that would change the course of galactic history. Admiral Blake looked exactly as he had 3 months ago when this war began, calm, determined, and completely unshaken by the devastation around him. His uniform was clean and pressed, despite having spent the last 90 days coordinating the complete destruction of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. "I do not understand your species," Krenth said, his voice barely audible through the damaged translation system. "We studied your military capabilities before this conflict began. Your ships were smaller, your weapons were primitive, your technology was centuries behind ours. Yet you fought like..." He paused, struggling to find words that his translator could handle. "Like the universe itself was trying to kill you," Krenth finally managed. Blake's expression didn't change. He had heard similar comments from dozens of Korthok commanders over the past few months, and his answer was always the same. "It is," Blake replied simply. "That's why we're still here." The truth was something that no other species in the galaxy could really understand. Earth wasn't just another planet with life on it. It was a world where everything had evolved to survive in conditions that would destroy most other forms of life. Humans had lived through ice ages that lasted thousands of years, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun, asteroid impacts that wiped out entire ecosystems, and diseases that killed 90% of their population. Every challenge had made them stronger, more adaptable, more determined to survive no matter what the cost. Krenth's mandibles clicked together in what might have been resignation or despair. "The surrender documents are signed. The Korthok Empire formally ceases to exist as of this moment. Our remaining forces will stand down immediately. Blake nodded and picked up the papers, but he wasn't finished yet. Over the next 6 months, human engineering teams would spread across former Korthok space like a plague of efficiency. Every weapons manufacturing facility was systematically dismantled. Every shipyard capable of building warships was destroyed. Every piece of military infrastructure that could be used to threaten innocent civilizations was reduced to scrap metal. It wasn't enough to defeat the Korthok. The humans made sure they could never threaten anyone ever again. Back on Earth, President Tyler Jackson sat in the Oval Office reading Admiral Blake's final report. The document was surprisingly short for such a momentous military campaign. Mission accomplished, Blake had written. The Korthok Empire has been completely dismantled. All military assets destroyed or captured. Recommend immediate establishment of permanent peacekeeping stations throughout former Korthok space to prevent any resurgence of aggressive activity. The Zelari people are free and have requested membership in our defensive alliance. Total human casualties, 847 wounded, 23 killed. In action, the enemy never learned to fight a species that considers survival a competitive sport. Jackson leaned back in his chair and smiled grimly. When the Galactic Council had asked for humanitarian aid, they had probably expected some medical supplies and maybe a few cargo ships full of food. Instead, they had gotten the most efficient military force in galactic history. Across the galaxy, in the crystal dome of the Galactic Council building, Director Morgoth was dealing with a completely new reality. The holographic displays that covered the chamber walls now showed human patrol ships stationed throughout what had once been Korthok space. In just 3 months, a species that had been considered primitive newcomers had completely reshuffled the balance of power in their section of the galaxy. Director Counselor Yethan said quietly, his silver skin pale with worry. We need to discuss how we communicate with the humans going forward. Our request for humanitarian aid resulted in the complete annihilation of a 300-year-old empire. Morgoth's tentacles writhed nervously as he studied the tactical displays. What exactly did we say to them? Yethan pulled up the original message they had sent to Earth. We asked for any assistance that would be greatly appreciated in dealing with the Zelari crisis, and their response was to send 200 warships and 50,000 soldiers, Morgoth said slowly. We must be extremely careful about how we phrase future requests to the humans, if they consider that an appropriate response to a call for humanitarian aid. What would they do if we actually asked for military assistance? The question hung in the air unanswered, because none of them wanted to think about it. What the Council was beginning to understand was that they had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They had looked at Earth and seen a pleasant, temperate world with a young civilization that had recently developed space travel. What they had failed to recognize was that they were looking at a planet where everything, the weather, the geology, the biology, even the other intelligent species had spent millions of years trying to kill humans, and humanity had not just survived. They had thrived. They had turned survival into an art form, adaptation into a science, and warfare into something that resembled a natural disaster more than a military operation. The galaxy was about to learn that when you ask for help from a species that evolved on a world where everything wants to kill you, you don't get aid workers and medical supplies. You get something much more dangerous. You get humans who have decided that your problem is now their problem, and they will solve it permanently.